Hello and welcome to our conversations with Academy Award nominated artists today. This is a special in our Dolby Institute podcast series. I'm here with my colleague from Dolby, Stuart Bowling, who is our content director. And I can't express to you how thrilled I am today to be in Emeryville, California at the studios of Pixar. We're talking about Incredibles 2 today with the folks who are nominated for the Academy Award for Best Animated Film. Nicole, Grindle, who's the producer of the film, and here with Mr. Brad Bird, the writer and director of the film. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you. We should also mention there is John Walker is also a producer, but is not with us today.
Yes, absolutely. And you worked with John for a long time.
Yeah, he worked on my first film, Iron Giant, my first feature film, and he came up with me to Pixar for the first Incredibles, which Nicole also worked on.
Right. So I just want to fan out for a second and tell you that my first experience of your work, Brad, was with the Family Dog.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
there's a sound quirky question in there.
Which I don't have. What is the sound quirky
First
question?
First digital sound on television.
What?
Yes, and not given credit for it.
No.
And the outfit that we used, it was the only episode of Amazing Stories that was a negative pickup, which means that they give you an amount of money and you spend it however you see fit. And so we were they had a 44 episode commitment, and we were the only one that was a negative pickup.
And you were also the only animated one, right?
Yes, that's right. And we needed to be that way because we needed to save money wherever we could. And we had a really crappy building that still had a cement floor with parking spaces marked on it. I mean, that's how cheap our place was. But we saved money where we could so that we could spend money in certain areas. And one of the areas was digital sound was just starting to happen, but it was in the unreliable phase.
Sure.
And stuff was breaking down a lot. We kind of went with this renegade sound place called EFX that were...
Oh, I remember EFX.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I said, on the deal that we made with them, I said, we'll take a chance on you guys because they didn't have a lot of long track record, but if this stuff breaks down, that's on you. We're not paying for any extra time. And so it ended up breaking down because it was all brand new. And we got a 3-day sound mix for paying for 1 day. But it was digital sound.
And I watched it again recently. That thing still holds up.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good.
It's fantastic. So that actually tees up sort of the first question, which is, so this podcast specifically is kind of focusing
sound.
Well, not necessarily specifically on
like
sound. Well, we do love sound, but about how artists are using technology to help them tell their story. So I love that Family Dog was one of the first digital sound things.
For television.
Yeah. Pixar has a great history of being innovative with technology, obviously with the image, but also Brave was the very first Dolby Atmos mix. And
Tomorrowland was the first Dolby
Vision.
Yes.
That's right.
And the Dolby Atmos reel that you got people excited about Atmos was 2 scenes from 2 different films I did. One was the chase in Incredibles at the end of Incredibles, and the other was the chase through the sandstorm, I think, in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Yeah, so we're big into Dolby here. Yeah.
And when he says we,
Yeah. No, come on.
we
Pixar
all are.
Too.
But
Pixar
you take
too.
it beyond. it's Bird Dolby Vision.
Bird Dolby Vision. I love that.
It's Dolby D-Vision. Yeah.
Well, for some of our audience, obviously I'm sure everybody on the planet has watched Incredibles 2 because you guys just did such a fantastic job with the
I
film.
think
It's
we
been
missed a
hugely
few
successful.
people in Guam. Yeah. And we're hunting them down now. Yeah.
But I know that the first Incredibles was a huge technological challenge for Pixar.
Yes.
You really pushed these guys, when you got here, you pushed them. Was Incredibles 2 as big a challenge from a technical perspective?
I would love to say that it was, but the true fact of the matter is we did everything that computers were bad at on the first film. That was our entire movie was every single thing that computer animation was bad at.
So
And
water, or
water, fire, clothing, hair, humans. Basically, we weren't so hot at them. In my book, and this is totally me, but I felt like there were two success stories in Pixar that met my criteria for how humans should be. One of them was a short called Jerry's Game, done by Jan Pinkava, who came up with the idea for Ratatouille. And the other one was Boo in Monsters, Inc. And I felt like those two characters were well-designed but simplified. And there was a grotesque period for humans in computer animation. And Pixar had its share of grotesque characters. And other studios also had a lot of really plug ugly characters. And we tried to move away from that and move toward Jerry's Game and toward Boo, and even further by caricaturing the characters and not trying to be real and not putting every pore in their skin and simplifying things like ears and stuff like that.
Because you had just come off of Iron Giant, which is 2D cell animation.
Right,
hand-drawn,
and originally Incredibles was supposed to be a hand-drawn film.
Really?
It was, yeah, the designs that I showed Pixar that I had done with artists in LA with my own money were all designs for hand-drawn. And they adapted just fine to computer animation. They're the same designs that we have in the film.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. Is there, I mean, I've heard you talk a lot previously about, that you're a filmmaker and a storyteller, and you don't like this firewall dichotomy between animated films versus live action films because you do both. But is there a difference? I mean, obviously there's an aesthetic difference between 2D cell animation and computer animation, but from a storytelling perspective.
No, there isn't. And there really isn't that much difference between animation and live action either. It's still the same visual language. You still have to deal with the issues of characters and performances that grab an audience and make the audience empathize. You're still dealing with the rhythm of edits and the fact that you have limited resources for X amount of time to produce whatever your story is doing. And it's just how you fill those boxes is slightly different. And I wish that actors saw animators as brethren rather than as some kind of technically, oriented, other people, because their challenges are the same. They're still trying to get an audience to connect to characters through performance.
Well, and actually, we had Holly Hunter come in when we were doing dailies for the movie. She was coming in to record, and she sat in dailies, and she loved every minute of it because of the kinds of conversations we were having about the choices that were being made, about gestures and the timing that a certain thing happened. She said, this is what we do as actors, but we never have that luxury of being able to sit in a room and break down every moment together. I think she loved the lab aspect of
that's interesting.
analysis.
Yeah, and that's one thing that animation doesn't have is spontaneity. It can have spontaneity when it comes up with ideas. You can have spontaneity when you're recording sound, and we've done some experiments with trying to get more spontaneity into animation, but it's just not that kind of medium. It's too complicated and too time-consuming. But the specificity of gestures and how people move and how people sit, and the fact that no two people, do the same things the same way. All of that is explored, and it's explored a little bit from the outside in, but that doesn't mean that it's any less felt. When people are doing hard scenes, they are just as possessed as actors doing theater or movies.
Well, so as a director, what's your technique? How do you approach setting up a space for the actors to do that? Because obviously, like when you're doing live action, you've got a set, they're in costume, you've got all that stuff to kind of help them get there. But in animation, how do you
we try to educate them somewhat by showing them bits, usually showing bits of our story reel, where we have temporary voices and their characters. I'm a little gun shy about it. I ask actors because I don't want them to feel like the scratch voice that we have should inform any choice that they do.
But you do let them hear that?
I say, do you care about seeing it? Sometimes I'll show them a sequence that doesn't have their character in it,
Right.
so that they get the gist. We show artwork to them. We show what the setting looks like. We describe it. The only thing that I do that's different, I think, from other people in animation, and I've been told this by actors, is that I hang out with them in the room. I don't sit behind a glass
You're not in
wall
the control room.
In the control room, because they feel like they're in a vacuum. And I've done some acting myself. I mean, I'm not.
Edna Mode,
Well,
for instance.
anyway, and I've taken acting classes, which was more for me to understand the actors.
How to work with actors.
Yes,
Yeah.
and what they feel and what they go through, and it's already it takes something to stand up and let go. But when you're in a room all alone with a mic in front of you and a bunch of people behind glass, it feels, I think, like you're on Mars or something, or in some kind of sensory deprivation tank. And I felt that I get good results being in the room with them and letting them know that I'm there too, and I'm there to help them or to give them any kind of detail. If they want me to read the other lines, I can do that. But they like feeling almost 2-1. They feel like they like not being alone.
Do you work with them one-on-one, or do you bring groups of actors together and do a scene together?
We've only done that a couple of times, and it's really great to do it, but there are technical issues
Because they overlap.
Yeah. Well, you are locked into any overlap, and the overlap is kind of what you're looking for.
Yeah, Robert Altman would tell you that's where the magic happens, right?
Right, and you want that too. There are ways to do that by prompting people and getting them excited and into a rhythm, and then editing it so that they overlap. Then you have control, but you don't get the live. The scene between Frozone and Bob in the car in the first movie was done with Sam and Craig on the stage, but we had to have all these barriers that they could see through,
Baffles
to
between them to get
separate
right.
their soundtracks.
Interesting.
But I would say that you do get line readings that are a surprise for you and have introduced new things into
Oh,
the
absolutely.
scene. Often. I mean,
Yes,
you'll
well-
expect the scene to play out a certain way, and then
And the
they
actor
give you
will bring something new to it. Absolutely.
really fun. I think Huck Milner was a great example of that. He plays Dash, and he's a young actor, and it was a lot of fun watching Brad work with him because he was very spontaneous and surprising, and he was kind of hyperactive. He had to run around the studio sometimes, and he'd read a line, and then he'd run around again. And we got a lot of really surprising stuff out of him.
And that was also true of the kid who did Dash in the first film. Spencer Fox. He was also kind of hyper, which is very normal for a 10-year-old boy, but that is kind of what you're looking for, that somebody that's spilling over with energy. And we got lucky twice, which is amazing.
And then the animators key off of that.
Right.
So you get really surprising animation.
Are you shooting video when you record the actors?
We do.
We do, but people use it sometimes. They don't use it others. People don't study it like a Bible. In fact, some actors, think that we're
Doing facial
we're
capture
just
or
absolutely
something.
taking every gesture from them, and
Well, because, like, for instance, Holly Hunter has a very distinctive way
Well,
that her mouth is shaped, right? But you echo
she
that
kind
in
of
the
speaks
film.
a little bit out of one side of her mouth,
Right.
just a little bit, and mainly it's for certain words and things, and that's something that we thought was so cool and unique, and just it's so great, and it's the kind of thing that most people don't do in character animation, to be quite frank. I feel like people have a standard way of animating dialogue, and that often they don't notice all the little quirks that people have. Bruce Springsteen has an underbite.
Sure.
And I almost never see any animated characters with an underbite. And he looks great with an underbite. That's Bruce Springsteen, Steve Jobs used his tongue just a little bit, and it was almost a lisp, but it wasn't. Mm-hmm. It was just a certain way of saying certain words, and I would love to see that in animation. And if you go and watch any talk shows on Sunday where they're just people sitting there talking heads, you can see the most quirky stuff around. And it's unanimated. Nobody has animated this.
You must have a very interesting perspective when you watch
Let me
television and other
I have
content.
to tell you that living in a world of animators does make you self-conscious, because all of the animators are noticing all these things about
Yes,
one another, and
yeah.
they talk about it, and you suddenly feel like you're under a microscope. You just can't think about it too much.
You
actually.
You can't, and you're blind to it too. I mean, I didn't figure out that Syndrome was sort of loosely based on me, the designs, until it was like so deep into the film that there was no way to change it, and I was like pissed off about it. You know, is that meant to be me? And they're like,
everybody else is like,
finally, finally he notices it. And I'm like, I'm the villain? That's the way you think of me? Come on. But anyway.
We call him like we see him, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Nicole, I have a question for you. So I think most people, especially outside of this world, don't necessarily know what editorial means in an animated film. What is the role of the editor, and how is that different from a live action film editing an animated film?
Well, I mean, they're deeply involved right from the beginning of the process when we first storyboard the film. When we don't generate live action footage like live action footage, but we generate storyboards, and the editor works very closely with the director.
Sometimes layout too.
And then, first storyboards to build that first kind of draft of the movie, and then we create layout, which is where we set the cameras into the shots, and
Crude versions of the sets.
Yeah, with characters that are more like stick figures, although
moving.
they've become more and more sophisticated over time, as everything has.
It's like blocking a play, though.
So the editor is working very closely with the director throughout that pipeline process to constantly craft the pacing of the movie. They craft the pacing of the dialogue, that overlap, that music. So I think editors are working continuously from the very first moment that we're creating any kind of visualization of the film all the way through to the end. And again, we have the ability to control more in some ways than you can in live action, because you're making
sculpting it more.
You're making changes you can ask for changes in the action, actually, in the animation, based on timing of cuts. Go back to an animator. We try not to do this too often, but go back and say we need to change that.
That's a little more specific to CG, though. You do that at great pain in a hand-drawn film.
Yes.
Where the time is spent, the time difference between hand-drawn and CG is that you are building the characters, and you almost have to look at the characters like aircraft or something like that, where it takes time to build each character so that all their controls work uniquely to them and that they're easy for the animators to deal with. That time in animation, if there were a race between a CG animated character and a hand-drawn character, the gun would fire and the hand-drawn character would start taking off, and the CG character would stand there for probably, if the race is a 3-day race, probably 2 days and 11 hours, and then suddenly that character would go the speed of lightning and end up probably in a near tie at the end. But it takes forever to build the characters. Right. But once they're built, you can change they're malleable in a way that hand-drawn wishes it could be.
Right, that character could run multiple races after that.
Yes, in other words, you could do a shot one way, and it takes time to animate it. Yeah. But if you wanted to change only one part in the middle of it, it would be easy for the animator to do that. Whereas in hand-drawn, how it hooked up to the drawings would change the minute you changed the middle. And so it's the allocation of time. It ends up taking about the same amount of time and about the same amount of money. For a big, complicated hand-drawn film, it would probably cost what a big, complicated CG film would. It's just how the money is spent and the end effect is different.
And building the radio play is another big part of it, I think. That pacing of that dialogue, we have the ability, again, to very carefully curate the pace at which a scene unfolds.
And if it doesn't work, we can redo the one line that we want to change,
right.
and have it be a continuous shot. You know what I mean? So the malleability of the soundtrack becomes the malleability of the visuals. I finished Incredibles in 2004. In 2005, I was asked to take on Ratatouille. And there was only one Pixar film between them, and that was Cars, which had no human characters. In fact, no non-car characters. But by that one film later, we were so much better at human characters that they were infinitely easier to work with in Ratatouille. So that's how quickly we got good, and we got good because of Incredibles.
Yep.
And so all of that stuff, including fire, hair, blah, 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 was great by the time we did Incredibles 2.
And I should also say that while we weren't revolutionizing the creation of some of those images, we got really fast at doing all of it.
Yeah, and we had a big time crunch on this film that we did not have on the first film.
Like a year less.
A year was taken off after we started doing it because Toy Story 4 wasn't ready to go in, and they said, can we go in early? And we were like, no. But if you knew what you wanted, this team of people and this technology could do it.
Absolutely. The virtuosity of these artists and this technology is stunning. It feels sort of like you could make anything you want and make it quickly in this world, which isn't true. But compared to where we were 14 years ago, it's a revolution.
Yeah. Okay, now.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about color, because color is always an integral part of every Pixar film and the way all the colors are picked out. Was there any change, obviously because we're picking up one after the other, how much did the color palette change between Incredibles 1 and 2?
Well, I think that if you looked at them as the work of different people, you will detect differences. The first film was, the lighting was by Janet LaCroix, and you know, she had a different set of tools to work with. Ralph Eggleston, Lou Romano was the production designer on the first film, and Ralph kind of helped him out, but on this film it was Ralph. And so there are differences. They are meant to stand by themselves alone, but the goal is still, you know, these are comic book type characters. They're playing superheroes. So if we suddenly got super dull and restrained, you know, and serious with the color, it would just seem out of whack. But each film has its own marshaling of color. There's a period where Bob's life, in the first film, it went from Technicolor times 10 to this really drab color palette because Bob was now working in an insurance company with no windows and an asshole for a boss, and you know, it was meant to be drained of vitality in that section, and then the color slowly returns to the film. But this film had its own orchestrated palette, and Ralph Eggleston and company, you know, really did a fantastic job on this film, I think.
I mean, one of the things that our newer visual techniques has allowed is more texture, which I'm sure is going to affect the way those colors land. I was thinking about the super suits. I think the super suits were much more monochromatic probably in the first one, or they appeared to be, because you didn't see the weave of those suits the way you can see it now.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of sneakily up the resolution without telling anybody, because if you tell people, they start to freak out and say we can't do it and stuff. And we kind of knew we could do it. So instead of asking for permission or telling anybody, we just kind of did it. And it's not quite 4K, I guess technically. It's like 3.5K, but it's a significant up-res from what we were supposed to be at, which was 2K. And you can see, especially in Dolby Vision, you can see just a tremendous amount of detail, and it's good detail. It's textural detail. It makes you feel something.
So with technologies like high dynamic range, how does that help you, and does that have a challenge in? I have a DCI release and I have a HDR release.
Yes.
To deviate and own look?
Yes, it is now, but I think in time it's going to be, I mean, now it's sort of like Technicolor was in the 30s. It's like not that many people had it at first, but you see it and your eyes get knocked out of their sockets. I would say that like anything that is powerful, you have to be careful how you use it. I was initially worried about Atmos because of changing perspectives and being able to, if you were that specific about sound, would it jerk people's head around if they suddenly changed perspective? I actually found out in that test reel that it helped with fast cutting because it oriented you quickly into the space. I thought it was going to be distracting, and it ended up, to me, helping the visuals. I thought we were going to have to be more general with the sound with rapid cutting, and it was surprisingly robust to me. But one of the things I learned on Tomorrowland is we had a scene where our character is in a sort of fluorescent, dingy sort of jail, and she touches a pin and finds herself in this sunlit field of wheat on a cloudless day, and we had to change the light. And when we did the Dolby Vision with it, it practically blinded you because the change was so quick, it actually hurt a little bit. So we actually had to dial it down. We were like, oh, this is going to be cool because we're going to be able to actually make people feel like they suddenly are thrust into sunlight. And then we did it and it was like, oh, I'm suddenly thrust into sunlight. And so we actually had to dial it down a little bit to get all of the feeling but not make it hurt because the palette had increased so much. And believe me, that's a wonderful thing to have. And so I love what Atmos and Vision has done in terms to enhancing the toolkit for a filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly hear from a lot of filmmakers, specifically in the low end of the black level and the
Oh
shadowing.
yeah,
and detail.
absolutely. What you see in the blacks is blacks used to, at a certain point, if there was no light, you would just lose all detail and it would just be this sort of swamp of black. But with the Dolby Vision blacks, you could keep it black, actual black, but see detail in it, like your eye does when it's really well adjusted to the dark. You can get little tiny bits of detail in the black, and you could have a frame that was fully black and still see what was in the frame.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that specifically because when I was watching the film again, I was struck by your use of negative space and blackness in the film. I'm thinking about some of the scenes with Bob when he's at the house late at night, and he's very small in the frame, like isolated in a way with all this blackness around him, and it really evokes an emotional response.
Yeah, well, that's kind of his journey. I mean, he wants to be in the game, and he sees himself as being parked in the parking lot, outside the game and hearing the game. Oh, that must be a hell of a game. What am I doing in the parking lot? What he doesn't realize is he's also in a big game. And it's got just as much color and action and probably has bigger consequences than the game he wants to be in its own way. And that's what the film is sort of about. It's celebrating that part of parenting. You're doing a major thing, and you could be doing a major bad thing, i.e. Hitler's parents, or you could be doing...
extreme example.
I think this is the first time Hitler has ever been evoked in our podcast.
Yeah. Or a really good thing where you're helping to thrust some good people out into the world who want good things for the world and are willing to do something to get them. So parenting is this sort of hidden, really important thing that people can participate in, but they should not do it lightly. If you don't want to be a parent, don't be a parent. Don't have kids, because it's hard. It's really hard. And that's also what the movie is about. You would think being a superhero would be harder, but in the movie, Bob sort of finds out, wow, this is just as hard. if not harder.
Especially when you're parenting super kids, super babies.
Well, there you go. we had to set him up in there and then make it worse by having the toddler have multiple powers.
Where did the inspiration come for the Jack and raccoon scene? That is just...
That's actually a wonderful guy that I absolutely love working with, named Teddy Newton. He's a one-of-a-kind guy, and he worked on Iron Giant, and I brought him up here to work on the first movie. He came up with that idea in the first movie, and because I thought I had structured it so that if it got too convoluted with Bob and Helen on the island, I could always cut back to the house with the babysitter dealing with Jack. But what I found, to my delight, was that the film had so much momentum that we didn't need to come back to the babysitter. So there was all this stuff of what Jack could do, because he starts to reveal his powers to the babysitter. And we ended up doing a short.
So some of that became Jack Attack, right?
Yes,
right.
Yes. Some of it became Jack Attack, just exploring that idea. But the raccoon idea was something that I was never able to get in the movie, and it was so borderline, like, not proper, what are you doing? You're taking a possibly diseased, creature and having him fighting a baby, but it was so funny in Teddy's drawings, and it got way crazier. I mean, they tackled each other and tumbled to the bottom of the pool. I mean, all kinds of stuff was happening. But I said, if we make another one of these, it has to be in the movie. So
that was actually the first sequence before you figured out anything else.
So
the movie was going to hinge around.
It actually was the first sequence we put into production.
Well, the first sequence we worked on was the opening, but we worked on that for years, on and off, while I did other films. But the first in production
was Jack and the Raccoon.
And we showed it at
D23,
yeah.
When it wasn't quite finished. And that's a really...
Brought the house down, I'm sure.
It sure did. And it was also useful for our crew, because when you start production and you don't have your whole film worked out, which we at Pixar almost never do.
Getting the heavy machinery going...
And you have to win over your crew.
You need to get everybody excited about what they're doing.
You need to get everyone excited about what they're doing, and you need them to feel like we know what we're doing. And so, we animated this first, and the crew loved it. It ignited the fuse of production for this movie.
Well, everybody loves Jack. I mean, my gosh, you created one of the most brilliant, iconic characters.
And it's the perfect scene for animation. I mean, this is where animation shines. It's a non-verbal scene.
And it sounds wrong. And you're flirting with wrongness on every frame, and to be able to do it in a way that doesn't feel wrong, where it's funny and not disturbing, was a challenge. But
something about it everyone relates to.
Yeah,
that's what's funny.
Yeah.
You understand Jack's indignation, and you kind of understand why the raccoon is pissed off. Like,
Yeah.
Why does this kid keep coming back?
Well, one of the ideas that Teddy had early on that was just brilliant to me was Jack looking at a robbery in an old movie on television, and then making the connection that the raccoon, who's also wearing a black mask, is doing something bad by taking stuff out of their garbage can. And so, he's stealing from us. And it was just so visual and funny that I was really happy we got it in.
And we talked a lot about that first punch that was thrown.
Yeah.
Right? Who should throw the first punch?
Right. Yeah, exactly. These are deep adult conversations.
Is it Greedo? Is it Greedo or Han Solo?
Yeah.
Well, there exactly.
We have him give him a little slap on the
nose.
On the nose. And people thought the raccoon should have started it, but I think it's better if the baby starts it. Yeah. And by the way, Han shot first.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about your approach to sound design for the film. One of the things that I really loved about, and The Incredibles was the first movie to ever win the Academy Award for Best Sound Editing.
First animated movie.
That's right.
Randy Tom did a brilliant job on it. Yeah.
That's right. And my sense in watching your films is, your animated films, is when you close your eyes, you feel like you're listening to a live action film because of the detail and the amount of stuff that's happening and the richness of the environments. What effect does that have on the audience to have that sort of approach to sound with the stylized visuals?
Well, I think that it gives credence to it. I mean, people often think that you're trying for reality when you make an animated film. Like you're attempting to make a reality, and you're not. You're trying to give people the experience of reality in a stylized way. And movies are that. I mean, live action movies are too. If you go to see Star Wars without music and without sound design, it's just a bunch of actors clomping around a empty stage that sounds not like the Death Star at all. And so I think that I am, as part of being a lover of movies, I am a lover of movie sound, and I revere guys like Murray Spivak, who did the sound for King Kong, which is one of the first uses of modern sort of sound design in an old film. And Murray Spivak worked on Sound of Music, which also has great sound for the 60s. And the Bay Area has been the home of many of the most brilliant sound designers on earth. I mean, Randy Tom, Walter Murch,
Gary Rydstrom. We shouldn't leave out Ren Klyce either, obviously.
Ren Klyce, and there's so many, and just Richard Beggs. I mean, there's a lot of guys. Alan Splett. There's a whole bunch of guys that do consistent, and girls, who do consistently great work, and they are as focused and about the detail as anyone else, and they want to create a sound space. But sound is like anything else; it's also character. Walter Murch talked about a scene where a character opens the refrigerator, and even though you don't see inside the refrigerator, there's a sound of an empty refrigerator and there's a sound of a full refrigerator. and if it's pretty much empty, that tells you the guy doesn't hang out there a lot. So that's the kind of thing that you may not know consciously, but subconsciously, there's part of you that is connecting with that film, and you don't know why, but it's because these guys figure out these beautiful soundscapes. Walter also did a synthesized bugs, insect sounds for Apocalypse Now, and he did them synthesized because he wanted the audience to feel uncomfortable. It gave you the feeling of being in the jungle, and yet it was not normal, and you didn't consciously know that. It sounded very much like a mosquito, but there's something slightly off it, or insect, and that's what made you like this, like something's wrong. And that's right before the tiger jumps out. So there are a million examples of really creative work, use of sound. And Ben Bird, how could we forget Ben Bird? He's just hanging out there like a big salami. It's just like, you gotta say Ben Bird. I mean, Star Wars is one of the most influential things for movie sound, along with Apocalypse Now. And they're both from the Bay Area and both Dolby. Not to kiss your corporate butt.
But we do appreciate it.
Okay, well, I'm just saying.
I guess, what is your hope for the future of our industry?
I would hope that, and this is what this is centered around, I would hope that people take more care in presenting movies. Technology is moving like it always does, and streaming is becoming a thing. And I also stream. I enjoy shows like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and, Game of Thrones and all this kind of stuff along with everyone else. But my love is movies, which it means people, strangers in the dark, gathering for a shared dream experience, and no pause button, No taking a phone call or sending texts. We're not going back. We're going straight through this story in the correct order with the correct sound level and the correct brightness, and you're going to have a trip. And you're all entering this starship together. And that's being lost. And anyone that combats the, movie theaters used to have identities. This one was like a Mexican village. That one is like King Tut's tomb. This one is a Chinese palace. Right. They each had their own identities, and they were distinctive. And we're now in a period where it's all these look-alike boxes. And anybody that recognizes the power of the movie experience and fights for it, like you guys do, like IMAX does, those guys are my friends, because this is the canvas that we get to paint with. And if they all become these little boxes that we have no, even for a moment, just a little control for a little moment, before it goes into all of our devices, where you can see anything anytime, you can stop it at any time, you can skip the parts that bore you. That sounds great to a consumer. To a storyteller, that is like nightmare. That is like a horrible place to be, because what you want is somebody starts with page one and they follow the story and take the journey. And Dolby and IMAX are all about enhancing the journey. And if anybody else comes up with something else that enhances the journey, they're my friends too, because I love the cinema experience. And the work that IMAX does and the work that you guys do enhances that experience, and it enhances our toolkit as filmmakers.
Right. It supports our ability to tell the kinds of stories we want to tell.
The way we want to tell them.
The way we want to tell them. And I do worry that streaming is going to undercut that, and there'll be a lot more disposable content. I agree there's a lot of great content there, but we're able to craft something like a jewel box that we present in this theatrical experience, and it won't be experienced the same way on a small screen.
Like, I want everyone to see Lawrence of Arabia. I don't want them to see it on their iPhone, and I love my iPhone too. But I don't even care if you have a good pair of ear speakers. That is not Lawrence of Arabia.
There's nothing that touches that theatrical collective experience.
No, and you look, a lot of people think silent movies were these things, herky-jerky, old-looking things. They were actually first generation prints. They were from the negative because they didn't know better back then. So they were perfect prints with these arc lights that were bright as hell. And the screens, if you go to the Castro and see an old movie in 133, box-like shaped screen, it's like a 2-3 story high screen. It's kind of 1920s version of IMAX. And if you hear somebody, if a live orchestra guy plays on that organ in there and he hits a bass chord, the theater shakes. So they had an early version of Dolby sound. They did. What I'm saying is that was the movie experience. When people talked about seeing these great old films, that's what they were seeing in the big cities. And we need to hold on to that experience. And all of these things are wonderful ways to enhance that.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I can't think of a better way to wrap up the conversation than with that. I did put out a call on social media for questions. Amazingly, we've actually covered almost all of them, but I did get one great social media question that I wanted to ask you, which was, will it be possible to get red carpet fashion analysis at the Oscars in character as Edna Mode? I mean, I would pay to see that, would you?
Yeah, I would have to take a lot of, I'd have to have people who know what they're talking about in my ear. I could come up with the insults, but the fashion knowledge I don't have.
Well, Brad and Nicole, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to us
Thank you.
about the amazing work on Incredibles 2. This is Glenn Kaiser and Stuart Bowling signing off from Dolby.